Well, the G20 conference in Canada wrapped up yesterday with the final communique stating that the group of 20 nations agreed to halve all budget deficits by 2013 and that they would tailor bank taxes and austerity measures by the needs of individual nations. But while world leaders may have had a pleasant experience, Toronto residents could say the opposite. On Saturday, thousands of protesters took to the streets to let their voices be heard, but they were met with a heavy police presence every step of the way. RT correspondent Lauren Lister has a sum-up of the weekend's events for us.
These are the images the world has been seeing from the streets of Canada during the meeting of the G20 leaders. Pictures of rebellion drowning out the voices who have been speaking up against the summit all week. People like Wendy.
The amount of money that was spent on the G20 could have erased homelessness in Canada.
Chris.
We're trying to bring the message to the world that the G20, doesn't represent the people.
Even author and political activist Naomi Klein.
This particular G20 summit really marks the failure of this institution. Here is where they stick us with the bill for that massive bank bailout.
And these are some of the peaceful causes other activists wanted to have heard by the G20 leaders and the world.
China lies! People die!
My sign represents what the G20 is promoting on a worldwide scale.
They rallied for them all week, culminating on Saturday when thousands tried to march to the fence surrounding summit headquarters to deliver their messages themselves. But around every corner, every block that could lead to that fence was a confrontation like this, a standoff of words, of masks, of battle marches. The smell of vinegar protecting against the threat of tear gas. A live fence more menacing than the 12-foot metal one a few streets away.
Glorious and free. What? Free? Free? What's this?
These riot police behind me are some of the reasons why activists here in Toronto ahead of the G20 and G8 summit all week have called this a police state.
At times, it gave way. Most times, it did not. Not for the people trying to break through.
Right, big! Thank you, that's what we like!
It's like some 50-year-old guy.
Not for the people trying to get home. But $1 billion in security focused on blocking people trying to move forward may have allowed a tide, a black bloc, to sweep backwards.
They had black balaclavas on. They came and they ruined the windshield of a cop car.
Characterized by officials and media as violent thugs, the black bloc tactic has been a mainstay of international protests for decades, and it has meaning.
It is completely a political statement.
One familiar with the tactic says it's not random at all.
The only stores that were targeted were corporate chains.
Breaking windows to shatter the illusion of power.
People say that this vandalism is violence, but what those corporations do on a daily basis is actually killing real people, real animals, and the environment on a daily basis.
Right now we're in the heart of the financial district in Toronto, where the streets are bare and have become virtually a war zone. A bank right here has had its windows bashed in. Protesters fill the streets, running up against riot cops as they try to get closer to the fence.
Authorities say more property than that was damaged, but some protesters think these men and women in black are responsible for the destruction.
They weren't really protecting anything, but they were intimidating people.
And despite this, people on the streets have been vying for their power and their rights still.
That is what hypocrisy looks like!
Though perhaps battling over the best way to go about it.
I'm proud to be Canadian, and this is embarrassing! I don't know why this guy's gotta hide his face.
Their voices are getting louder.
You fascist bastard!
We have a right to peaceful protest anywhere we choose!
But as gray skies open up,
clouds are just weeping for this injustice to the people.
And another night falls on Toronto, and G20 leaders fly home with new decisions made for fiscal recovery and reducing deficits. Have those voices really gotten anywhere? For Wendy,
People can't afford a decent housing, can't afford a good quality of life.
for Chris,
We're just trying to protect our planet.
For Naomi.
There isn't just one way out of it. It's a choice.
For the world.
Like we're seeing it in Spain, we're seeing it in Greece. This is a global issue.
Lauren Lister, RT, Toronto, Canada.
Well, Lauren's here in the studio to tell us some more. Now, Lauren, these protests at the G20 are something that have almost become like tradition. Anytime there's a G20 summit, there's a protest to go along with it. I've covered them myself in Pittsburgh. And there's always happens to be violence that comes with the protests as well, although they always say that they plan for them to be peaceful. This was obviously no exception in Toronto. Aside from the violence, aside from wanting to torch the police car, did you get a message from the people that were robed in black, bashing windows open?
This is the thing, and this was interesting to see the way that this is covered in the media, because in Canada, this was very much covered as thugs causing destruction and random violence throughout the city. There was no message taken away from it by officials, by the media. And what's interesting is when you talk to people that are familiar with these tactics and familiar with these groups, is that they do have a message, whether you like it or not. They're using these tactics purposefully. They're targeting specifically corporations that they feel are creating violence and the problems in the world. Corporations such as Starbucks, corporations such as McDonald's, corporations whose windows they smashed. And they do this because they believe that although, as Chris, who I interviewed, said, many of these people on their off time are, at food banks working. They're helping people get educated. They're working in their community, but they believe that in order for any real change to happen, they have to use these kind of means. They have to take these violent measures or these drastic measures. And what they did want to stress is that no people are targeted, no mom and pop shops are targeted. Now, I do want to say that police that I did talk to said that there were some of those mom and pop shops and cars and things that were vandalized, but that isn't the point of at least the protesters that I spoke to.
But what about those that chose not to act that way? Those that chose to stay peaceful, not bash in windows, set cars on fire? Do they feel like these other people are ruining it for them, like they're taking away from their message?
Well, here's the interesting thing. What witnesses of the Black Bloc in Toronto said, and this was really characterized in the media as a small group of thugs that took away from the rest of the thousands of peaceful protesters. But what witnesses said was that this wouldn't have been possible without the support of a number of other protesters that were with that bloc, that were, behind them all the way, that enabled them to get through the city and move through the city and evade authorities. So that's one interesting angle. But definitely there were many protesters that were outraged at the havoc that they caused, believing that it took away from all of the messages of the people that do not resort to these means and that do not find this is the way to make their statement, which obviously there were tons of different causes all represented out there on the streets.
Well, not to mention the fact that what you didn't get to cover in your story is that on Sunday there were more protests across Toronto, and hundreds of people were arrested, even journalists. So in many ways you could say that these actions backfired because a lot of people feel that the police then acted preemptively to stop any more violence from happening.
You could. It's hard to say, but all of the hundreds of arrests that occurred on Sunday, it did seem to be kind of this backlash over the protesters that were out on Saturday. Now, I do want to point out, though, the way that there were a lot of arrests over Saturday night, hundreds, and they were characterized as, catching the thugs. But a lot of these were reports of peaceful protesters. There were reports of people just having sit-ins, and 100 being arrested en masse and with no real indication as to why. So there was a lot of confusion about the arrests, and they certainly escalated on Sunday. And even now I'm getting reports people are having a peaceful protest of the reports of police brutality and that sort of thing, and police are making more arrests. So
it's something that's still going on. Very quickly, I just want to ask, because lately we've seen a lot of protests all across Europe due to austerity measures, something discussed there at the G20. Canada itself is supposed to make some cuts. Was anyone out there preemptively protesting cuts?
Well, that's a really interesting point. It's one that Naomi Klein made. She draws that connection, and it's one that a lot of these protesters were protesting cuts to programs that have already occurred in Canada, programs for homelessness, programs for social welfare that have been cut, that they are arguing, these programs could have been saved instead of spending $1 billion on security to host this summit that we didn't want.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot of questions still up in the air as to what the right steps are, and that's one of the main debates, too, is to cut or to spend. That was Lauren Lister filling us in on the events in Toronto. Now,